Who was your worst boss and what was the worst thing about them? Story 1. I've posted this before, but I don't mind sharing it again. For me, one of many was when I informed my supervisor that I received news that my grandfather passed away that morning. For months, I had informed my supervisor of my grandfather's health conditions. So news of him passing away shouldn't have been that big of a surprise. I asked for the next few days off to help with arrangements and to be with my family. My supervisor says, "Why? They're not burying him tomorrow." I responded, uncharacteristically calm, "It doesn't matter if he's buried tomorrow or not. My family needs me." Thankfully, I'm no longer at that job. I do regret not reporting my supervisor, but I have a feeling it wouldn't have done any good. I've had other terrible supervisors from various jobs, but that one still sticks out in my mind. Oh, and the job, pricing department at J.C. Penney's. Apparently, the doorbuster deals were more important than my grandfather. Story 2. Oh, there have been so many, but I'm going to go with the jackass who started selling Amway from his office. I've posted about him before. He was pressuring all of his staff to buy stuff and implying that people buying from him and/or joining him on the pyramid would benefit from it. Raises, extra vacation, etc. He also tried to get the company to start purchasing through his side business. I reported him, and when HR asked him if it was true, he said, "Sure is. Do you want in?" Bam! Escorted out the door. Comment: my ex-BF has chronic pain, and his supervisor sold him special oils. Story 3. Ha! Depends on how you define bad. Pretty good boss, but he did beat and stab his wife to death and ditch the evidence at the dumpster at work. Boss fired 3 of us for refusing to do an improper entry so he could get his bonus for the quarter. Boss got caught trying to cook the books for a division of the company so his company could buy it. He threatened to off everyone. Micromanager boss announced at 2 a.m. before going live that morning that all the reports needed changing because she wanted a period after something that wasn't a sentence. She also made me work through a fire alarm. I think she got in trouble for that. Boss just changed my job description and duties 100% with no training to try and make me quit so they could deny unemployment. That one made me cry every day before work. It was brutal. Story 4. My current boss, probably. He micromanages, but worse. He micromanages us into doing stupid stuff. Like, he'll come look over your shoulder and ask you how your task is going, and you'll say, "Well, I can do it this way," which is more efficient, cheaper, faster to implement, and easier to read. Then he'll say, "No, do it this less efficient, slower, messier way that gives baby seals cancer." I exaggerate a bit, but he always chooses the worse of 2 options. And if you don't give him a second option, he makes up his own, and it's worse than whatever you could think of. Story 5. My worst boss once told me my shoes weren't black enough to fit the dress code and I needed new ones. They faded from heavy use. I couldn't afford more than 1 meal a day on his crap pay, but they're not black enough for him. Story 6. Jerome. Attorney who knew I was underpaid but acted friendly to me. Whenever I interviewed somewhere else and they called for references, Jerome lied about me being impatient and said I had a temper when dealing with others. Luckily, I had given my next interviewer written copies of annual performance reviews that Jerome had written praising me. I didn't learn about the lies until a year after being gone from under Jerome. The interviewer told me she found someone else in my references who had said, "Jerome is an a-hole." Story 7. Had a grubby restaurant owner who delighted in being an a-hole. His favorite thing was belittling and yelling at employees in front of customers, almost like he was putting on a show. Shamed a fellow employee so bad she burst into tears for the crime of asking to go to the bathroom. Story 8. Worked for a boss that was a candy addict. He had a habit of calling you at 2 a.m. to yell at you about random things. He'd have a bump, then spend the next hour running around the office trying to pump up the other workers. The worst part was that you never knew who was coming through the door in the morning. Was it happy, smiling boss, or hungover, burned out of candy boss? The job sucked, and most people would quit after their first late-night butt chewing. Story 9. My service manager was a know-it-all, and Lord help you if you disagreed with him even when he was wrong, which was often. Found out later he got the job because he was standing in the right place at the right time. Too many other things to mention. Story 10. I worked in a mental health clinic where the manager was cruel and the supervisor dense as a stump. Some of the best staff quit as a result. They were eventually investigated and transferred. Story 11. Micromanaged me down to the second, became belligerent if I asked him questions, and when I suggested new processes to improve the job, he belittled them and got angry for stepping on his toes. All the worst things about being a manager rolled into one angry package. Story 12. Probably the cowardly woman who allowed a patron to assault me and not only refused to trespass the person, but attempted to demand I personally serve them, to model good behavior to the rest of the staff, LMAO. Story 13. I used to work for Rogers. One of the supervisors would seriously sit there and try to make it look like he was busy when he was doing F-all. Sitting there clicking the mouse, typing on the keyboard, but you'd walk by and the screen would be blank. I needed a supervisor for a particular call, and when he was done, he told me to stop wasting his time. Story 14. He was a micromanager on a level I didn't think was possible. One of those people who I swear would tell you you're yawning wrong and how to do it the right way. Because I worked in the field, his solution as a micromanager was to call me constantly and check up on things. Then he'd complain about projects taking too long. Here's a thought, genius. Maybe if you didn't call me and the other foreman every 10 effing minutes to interrupt our work, we could actually get things done on time. Story 15. I once had a boss that was a psychopath. Apparently, she recreated the workplace and employees in the Sims game and enjoyed playing God and lighting us on fire. It was a hobby she was dumb enough to brag about to the wrong person. Needless to say, she is gone. Story 16. I was an assistant to a spoiled princess wannabe. The dad wanted her to take over the business. He was an insurance agent, and she wanted to save kids from cancer. So my job was to call people to remind them of their monthly payment and, in passing, trying to convince them to donate to the cause. I could do it. I've had worse jobs. But she would sit next to me all day, observing how I worked, telling me off for not saying exactly what she wanted me to say, but not telling me what she wanted me to say. She would drone on about her rich friends while I was trying to make the calls, would get mad if I interrupted her to make a call, and at the end of the day, she'd tell me off for making so few calls. Also, her idea to save the kids from cancer was to paint the wall of the hospital full of Disney characters. It was painted with Bugs, Bunny, and friends, and according to her, Disney would heal the kids faster. Whatever face you are making, yes. When I quit because I was sick of her after a week and a half of work, I just blurted it out, and she got so Karen like that, she got up, pushed my chair out of the office and into the lobby, got in the way so I wouldn't grab my purse until I told her I would call the police. Then she threw the purse at me and didn't let me get my office stuff, my mug, notebook, pens, and even the stapler I had bought because she didn't provide me with any office supplies. It might not sound too terrible, but it has been the only time in my adult life that I've wanted to punch someone that's within reach. I remember stopping myself because I knew her daddy could sue me or worse. Story 17. Had an African-American boss who'd frequently stop by my office, shut the door, and play 20 questions about something he said I did wrong, which I didn't actually do wrong, just to F with me. The guy I replaced, also white, in his last weeks before leaving for another job, curiously had a brace around his right-hand knuckles. Later, I found it was because the same boss pissed him off so much he'd punched a concrete column. Edit. Bet if the ethnicities were reversed, there wouldn't be downvotes. Sorry, racism is race agnostic. Anyone can be racist to anyone. Story 18. My worst boss was the last one I had. I worked in textile uniform fabric in December, and on my first day, my boss didn't teach me my job, but told me to Google and use YouTube for help. My workplace was the vinyl one, and she always had bought cheap and awful materials, so employing them on clothes was extremely hard and stressful, plus that my vinyl cutter machine was damaged and my boss didn't even look for someone to repair it or buy a new one as she requested me to do miracles. The working hours were supposed to be from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., but I stayed even until 9 p.m. because there was so much work to do. She doesn't pay extra hours, though. I wanted to quit weeks later, but they didn't let me give in to the fact I learned and became useful in my workplace quickly, until I had a burnout where I had spasms and cried. Story 19. A workaholic that constantly drew everyone in. Oh, here are new changes to the thing everyone needs to worry about right now. Also, I made a few changes still to the thing from last week nobody worries about anymore. Let's also quickly discuss what's coming up next week and the week after. Story 20. Used to be a dishwasher at a 2.5 Michelin star restaurant. Staff were all abusive. The boss was not only abusive, but a narcissist who gave me shiz for minor mistakes on my first day. Ditched that job in a month to deliver pizzas at a local independent place run by actually nice people. Story 21. I had a store manager who wouldn't talk to you but talked at you. He once asked me why the store wasn't right the night before. I reminded him I was off and was told to shut up. It's rhetorical. He then proceeded to tell for 20 minutes about how, even if I'm off, it's my responsibility to make sure it's done. He lost his job a few days later when every non-manager walked out and told the district manager we wouldn't return to work till he was gone. Story 22. My worst boss is my current boss. What I hate about her is that she never wears deodorant for one, and she's the kind of person that needs to talk right in your face. But in a more management sense, she is a control freak, and she's not satisfied unless things are running exactly the way she wants them to be, despite that not being the best option for the current state of business. She cares too much, and she just wants to be the best, and I know that's not necessarily a bad thing, but she takes that aggression out on the rest of the management team, and it's constantly making me feel like doing a crappy job when I'm really out here trying my best. Story 23. I worked in a kitchen at a retirement home at this point. I was the morning cook and became good friends with the late cook before he got promoted, even attended his wedding with my partner, and overall had a good time. Fast forward 2 months, and our head chef retires and he gets promoted to head chef. I was happy for him. Shortly after he got his promotion, he started to get more and more lazy, where I would have to stay late in the day to make sure all the orders were put away and the rest of the staff had everything they needed for their shift. Got to the point where he would sit outside and smoke for 45 to 1 hour at a time. Found out he was sleeping with the building manager's daughter. When the building manager tried to discipline him, her daughter stepped in and told her not to bother him if she wants to see her grandchildren anymore, and even demanded he get a raise. So I put up with it for a few months. When I told him that my partner was pregnant and that my son was due in July, all he said was, "Oh man, better not F up my birthday weekend." Fast forward to when my partner goes into labor at 4:30 a.m. I call him and tell him that I won't make it to work as my son is going to be born. He calls me back at 5:30 asking if he was born yet, and when I tell him no, he asks if I could come in for a few hours while we wait. When I told him no, he had a hissy fit over the phone and hung up. On my first day back, he brought me into my office and wrote me up for missing shifts. I quit and thankfully got a new job straight away. But it took him 3 months for him to give me my vacation pay, and he only did when I went to the labor board. Last I heard, they couldn't find a replacement cook that wanted to work with him. The only other cook quit because of him, and some of the serving staff also left. When he finally got fired, it was only because the district manager came and saw him show up late and just sit in his office sleeping. Then was fired on the spot. Story 24. My first real job ever, had a paper route, but I'm pretty sure I worked illegally, LOL, was at a local fast food place. Not a chain, just owned by this older guy. I was still presenting as a girl at this point, and definitely underage. He was my dad's friend. Just constant massages, weird remarks, putting his hands on my waist to pass me. I was 15. He also tried to convert us all to Scientology because he was super high up in the local Scientology church. I quit. I've never told my dad. Story 25. Hard to choose between the one who I realized wasn't paying me as much as my coworkers because I was a woman, or the guy who sexually harassed me while I did my job. One was worse at the moment, harassment, but one had wider-reaching effects, less money. Story 26. My worst boss was my supervisor at a factory that I used to work at. He was a no-nonsense, get-stuff-done kind of guy, which itself isn't bad. I have that attitude when I'm working in that environment myself. What made him so bad was that he was disrespectful as hell, conniving, and would go out of his way to get people fired. Tried to intimidate me into missing a court date. When I told him that I wasn't risking jail time, he threatened me with a write-up. HR told him he was full of shiz and that it was excusable as long as I had proof. Tried to tell new employees that their parole officer meetings were not excusable and that if they had to see their PO, they should go to the doctor to get a note or they would receive points. I believe HR called him out on this as well. Roamed the factory snooping on people, even those that had nothing to do with our department. Tried to get a couple of well-liked and respected maintenance guys fired over nothing. Would regularly try to push through damage and defective product. We butted heads over this often as I was the last person in position to really catch any defects. Had to get quality control to back me up several times. We made attic ladders, and much of the defective ones he tried to send through would have gotten someone seriously hurt or killed. Held back a temp worker from being hired full-time as long as he could because the temp was working on gaining citizenship and had to miss some days. He didn't get hired full-time until my supervisor got moved to a different department. Supervisor was moved to a different department, started having an affair with one of his employees. He gave her a much undeserved promotion. He was later fired from this as the company started cracking down on that kind of thing. About a year after he was fired, he died when he fell down his basement stairs. Story 27. I worked for a lighting electrical company as an account manager several years ago. My main job function was to take service calls from our clients and dispatch technicians to fix the problem. The owner, president, was a cheap, immoral bastard, and that trickled down to the rest of us. Due to insanely inept corporate mismanagement, one of our branch offices was forced to shut down. My boss, who was a manipulative, controlling bitch, informed me and everyone in my position that we were then required to be on call after hours with a company cell phone and a binder of subcontractors on a rotating weekly basis. When I objected, the bitch said, "It's part of your job," despite the fact that no such stipulation existed in my offer letter. I was woken up at 2 or 3 in the morning several times to call half a dozen contractors to dispatch an electrician or a lighting technician on an emergency service call. I absolutely hate myself for even tolerating that shiz. The president was using money from a side company he owned to pay the debts from our company, which I'm pretty sure was illegal. I'm amazed they're still in business. Story 28. Worked in Steamboat Springs a while back and worked at this sushi bar. The owner was super toxic. I worked 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. He never let me go on vacation. I had to do everything, and he would always gaslight me. One time, my current BF at the time asked if I could take a couple of days off to go camping, and the owner said no. I even had to work 2 weeks straight to make up for a sick day. It was awful. Found out from a friend after I quit, the owner got drunk and harassed his ex. Story 29. I worked 9 years for a real winner. Used to sing my praises in the morning, then keep me 2 hours after work to tear me down until I was in tears, over and over again. would ask me to call her by her first name, then yell at me for not using her proper title and surname. She was the epitome of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and she was an actual doctor. I fell behind on my filing, so she dictated a threatening letter to me, made me type it, then signed it. Story 30. When I worked at McDonald's as a teen, we got a new restaurant manager, Maddie, who was a good employee but a terrible manager, in that she didn't know how to effectively manage people without being an asshole about it. I stupidly agreed to do Sunday morning opens, which meant I would work 6 a.m. 2 p.m. most Sundays. It was always just me until at least 7 a.m. when the next person would start. McDonald's has multiple managers that work different days, and on Sundays, I was always stuck with Maddie. Sundays were always the day junior sports were played, so it was often super busy with parents getting coffees and breakfast on the way to and from their kids' sports. There was also a flower festival in town that weekend, so it was even busier than normal. I was a crew trainer that purely worked in the kitchen because I never wanted to deal with customers. So on this particular Sunday, we were understaffed, as usual, and I didn't have anyone come in at 7. They came in at 7:30, which is fine, because at least they turned up. However, it wasn't the person who was supposed to come in who was an area leader, basically a low-level manager that focused on the main areas, kitchen, McCafe, or front area. Instead, I got someone that was relatively new, had only been working there for a couple of months, and was very inexperienced. So I kept going, doing my best to get the kitchen ready for the rest of the day, whilst making all the orders and getting the other guy to make sure they kept cooking sausage, eggs, bacon, etc. Normally, the next person starts around 8:30, but I didn't get anyone until about 9, which was fine. By 9:30 a.m., I should have about 4 to 5 people working in kitchen. I had only 3. They had to send one of the front area people, who was also a crew trainer, to operate side 2 by themselves. This guy was not super experienced in kitchen, but he knew enough to get by, but he was struggling to do it by himself. So we were getting pumped in the kitchen because of all the inexperienced kids working, and Maddie is doing nothing to help us except getting angry that we were taking too long. I was getting really frustrated because I'm doing the best I can, and I was sliding the muffins along the bench with a bit of extra force due to the frustration. They would often become unwrapped when they hit the end, and eventually she cracked it with me. She started saying that she could do my job for me and run the store at the same time, and that she may as well just send me home. She kept saying that when she would pick up each order, so I looked her in the eyes and told her to do it, send me home. Because if you do, everyone in this kitchen will walk out with me. She stopped threatening to send me home, but I still got dirty looks and was told to hurry up in very unfriendly ways. Luckily, I finished at 11:30 that day instead of 2, and it was the first time I'd ever finished a shift, and broke down in tears in my car after it. This was the first shift of a couple of shifts with Maddie that made me decide to look for a new job. McDonald's obsession with speed creates a terrible work environment. I'm so glad I don't work there anymore. I hope you liked these stories. If you did, please consider subscribing and giving me a thumbs up to let me know you like them. I will be putting more on here like this. Thank you and have a great day.